Okay, welcome everyone to the Early Intervention Training Program's Webinar Wednesdays, where today we're going to be listening to Bonnie Kielty talk about Not So Fast, taking the time to understand family strengths to use in interventions. As I said, our presenter today is Bonnie Keilty. She is an associate professor at Hunter College, is an author of a couple of different books, past president of the Division of Early Childhood, and Bonnie will tell you a little bit more about herself when she gets started. But welcome, Bonnie. We are so glad to have you. And I know you're logging in from not within Illinois, so you can let us know a little bit more about where you're at, too. So if you've been on webinars before, you will have recognized this slide. So as I said, my name is Maria. I'm here to kind of help things along. We also have Alyssa Jones, who is also from the training program, helping me in the background as well. So folks, if you have any technical issues, anything like that, give us a chat in the chat box, and one of us will probably do a private chat with you from that point on to kind of work through your issues so it doesn't bog up the main chat box. But so just be on the lookout for that. Also, just a quick reminder, this webinar will provide Illinois EI credit and Illinois state licensure credit for OTs, PTs, SLPs, social work, and nutrition dietitians. After the webinar is over, sometime this afternoon, you will get an email from the training program, and in that email will be a survey. Complete that survey, and within 24 hours of your completion of that survey, you will get a certificate of completion, a certificate for attendance for this webinar. So if you didn't register, you won't get an email. And if you don't get an email, you don't get a survey. And if you don't get a survey, you can't get your certificate. So make sure you register. If you're on here now with a group, make sure you've individually registered so you can get that in email. Any questions with that, you can contact the EI training program at eitraining@illinois.edu, and we can assist you further with that. So many of you have participated in webinars before. I recognize many of the names, but we have a few folks that I don't necessarily recognize. So I want to just go over a couple of the tools related to webinars. So webinars are awesome. As I said, I'm sitting in my home office in Springfield, didn't have to drive anywhere. Webinars are great that way. We don't have to drive. We can just, plug in and go. The downside to webinars is I can't see you, Bonnie can't see you, you can't see us, and so we do miss a little bit of that communication, that personal communication face-to-face. So we make up for that a little bit, not completely, but a little bit, by using some tools within the webinar system. So we really want you as participants to be as engaged as possible. So there are going to be times that we're going to ask you to do certain things, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So on your screen, let me pull up my pointer. If you're on a computer, your screen should look something like this. And you should have your left-hand side is your control panel, the white, and then the right 2/3 or so is your whiteboard or the presentation section. If you are on a handheld device, it's going to look something like what is on the right. And that is, this one is from, I don't remember if this is from my iPad or my phone, but either way, it's a handheld device. One of them will have the chat box and everything here. One of them has a participant list on the side, which is this button up here. Let me grab my pen here. All right, so here's our participant list. If you want to access to see who all is in your participant list participating today, you click that button right up there. All right. Okay, so that is your control panel. Now, part of the things that we will do is use our chat box. So our chat box is a great place to ask questions for clarification. but also to share strategies. Like I said, say hello to somebody you haven't seen in a while. Our presenter may ask questions and she asks that you respond. So again, we ask that you participate as much as possible. So, you know, like you would if you were in a face-to-face, you know, so please participate if our presenter asks a question for you to respond to. The chat box is at the lower side. It's pretty easy. You can see at the bottom where you can type in your chat and then hit send. There's also some emoticons if you want to play around with that a little bit, but that's fine. So that is where our chat is. Also, we have a couple other tools. We have a hand raise tool. So if you're on your computer, it is right below where your name is. It's in this little box right here. It's the third box below your name. If you're on a handheld device, it is right below your presentation area, right above your chat box. So if everyone would, just find that hand raise tool and raise your hand. Let's just see if folks can find it. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you should have access to these tools. It should look something like that. All right, if everyone would please find the hand raise tool and raise your hand. Waiting on some more folks here. All right, now to unraise your hand or to lower your hand, just click it again and it will go down. Thanks, everyone. All right, one more tool is the polling function. So on your computer, it is the fourth box under your name. On your handheld device, it's the fourth box under your presentation area right above the chat. And it will either look like it is here, where you've got a checkbox in it, or it may look like here, where it has a letter A in it. Those just correspond to the types of polls that we might offer. So if you click on that or hover over that box, a drop-down box will open up and you'll have options. And then you just click on the option that you have and it will register. Polls are really nice in that it helps us as presenters to really know, verify understanding, make sure that we need to, if there's anything we need to address, or just get a feel for where folks are in their process of intervention. So I'm going to just do a practice poll here real quick. And so go ahead and find that box under your name and let us know who's here today, all right? I'll give folks a few seconds to find it. We ask that you use the polling function, but if you are an other, type it in the other box and go ahead and let us know you're an other. So we'll give folks a few seconds to do that. All right, it's that fourth box right under your name. Hover over it and then click on the appropriate response. Okay, waiting on a few more responses. We ask everyone participate in the polls and the questions. All right, let's see who we've got in the room. So, Bonnie, it looks like you have a big audience of CFC staff today, as well as a few of the motor therapists and language pathologists and DTs. And then in our other, it looks like we've got some folks from monitoring, EI training program, and such. So that's your audience for today. CFC staff will be those that include service coordinators and parent liaisons and LIC coordinators and social emotional consultants. So we've got Mindy from, she's a family liaison at Easter Seals. Hi, Mindy. All right, well, Bonnie, I think I've warmed them up, got them prepped, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. Just to double check, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect, okay, great, thanks. Well, thank you everybody for joining this webinar and spending your lunchtime with me. As Maria said, I'm from Hunter College, and that is in New York City, and I'm actually right now on campus on the Upper East Side of New York. So while I'm on the 9th floor, you might hear sirens or other things going off that I don't always hear, but people on the phone can hear them and tell me that they do. My work for the last 25 years has been in early intervention, and most particularly supporting families in their role as parents and parenting their child. I've worked in homes and hospitals as well as in inclusive classrooms, being a support and coach to those in the classrooms as well as to families. And now my work, I coordinate the early childhood special education program here at Hunter and focus on families, authentic assessment, and curriculum adaptations. And one of my areas of research is on using family strengths in our work with families during home visits. And so that's one of the things, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, to start off, just to reiterate what Maria said, you know, a couple of process items. So one is, please do ask questions at any point. Maria will be moderating those for me. So at any point you want to ask a question or provide some input, that'll be great, and Maria can then make a decision of, you know, should she jump in at this point or share your question or comment during we have certain question breaks. But the more input from you, the better. You know, as Maria said, you know, if we were all together, we would be interacting, and we want to make this as interactive as possible because that's what good professional development is versus feeling like I'm just talking at you. And then the other thing is you would have received in your email a reflection and action plan. We're going to return to that at the end of the webinar, but feel free to take notes on it or document notes on the side, and then after we get to the end of it, we'll be using those to have a little bit of thinking about next steps. So, not so fast, taking the time. I put this as the title because sometimes we feel like as early interventionists we need to move to intervention right away. And we're also, as professionals, very used to doing, you know, to saying, okay, what do we need to do next? And sometimes it's taking that time so that we really understand families to really be able to individualize our interventions for them. And so, you know, and Doris Buehler's from Chicago, right? So that's my Illinois connection here. Is that, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss what family strengths, the strengths that families bring to early intervention, and you don't want to miss an opportunity to understand those strengths and what that means for how this particular family parents and how they think about their child and their child's development. Because that's really going to make us be able to really individualize our interventions for that particular family. So what are we going to do? We're going to start off by considering the various kinds of strengths families bring to early intervention to meet their outcomes. And we're going to focus most particularly on those strengths that families bring to supporting their child's learning and development, although we are going to talk about other family strengths as well. We're then going to describe ways that you as practitioners can identify and utilize those strengths to meet families' outcomes, reflect on these practices and how you might be able to enhance your current practice, and then also thinking about what are those underlying values and beliefs that make up a strengths-based mindset. What do we need to really be thinking about and believing in order to practice from this perspective? So what are family strengths? So here's our first opportunity. If you can go into the chat and just sort of identify some of the things you think are family strengths. Just document anything that you think about from a family strength perspective.
We've got several folks typing. It looks like Jennifer saying togetherness. We've got Shelby, supports and resources, resilience, nurturing, family dynamics, siblings, engagement, supportive, educational background. Jennifer saying communication and bonding. Carol is saying concern for family, support from extended family, positive motivation. Sarah's listening, good listeners. Katie has got a sense of safety. There's a whole bunch of them coming up.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for jumping in. And you can see some of these are outside of the family, right? What do they have available to them? And then there's other ones that are very internal to certain family members even, like being good listeners and positive motivation, and then some specific to the entire family, such as how they spend time together. So you could be looking at family strengths from an individual family member, the entire family, and then what are those supports and resources around the family. So now we're just going to do a couple of quick raise your hands if. So raise your hand if you've been able to identify family strengths prior to an IFSP meeting. Who has had opportunity to do that?
Just remember that hand raise tool on the computer is the third box under your name or the third box under the presentation if you're on a tablet or mobile device. All right. Right now we've got about 25 folks that have had, 26 folks that have had their hand raised.
Great, great. Thank you for doing that. We're going to do it a couple more times. How about having the, and I still hear folks coming in, how about identifying family strengths prior to starting intervention, during your initial home visit? So I heard a whole lot there too. Maria, does this count then?
Yes, it does. So if you scroll down, I'm looking at 22 have raised their hands so far. 23, yes.
Okay.
Oh, now there's more. 25 now.
Okay. Great, thank you. And then one more, which is how about during those subsequent home visits as part of intervention, identifying family strengths?
Right now, let's see, we've got, oh, we're starting to get more here, so let's see. I'm hoping that most folks would have this one. We got 29 so far.
Okay, perfect. So I'm so happy that everybody's so participatory too. That's great. So again, at any point, feel free to add questions as well. So we do spend a lot of time identifying family strengths. So in the chat box, can you now share some of the ways you do that? How do you identify those family strengths? What do you do to understand them?
So we are getting some responses. Kristen and Brandy say observations. Brenna is saying asking the family about their resources. Valerie is also saying observation. Asking about the family routines, listening and observing. Questions. Valerie says asking questions. Watching and listening. Listen to how the family describes the child. Checking the interventions. That's Marie. Lynn, commenting on what I see a person doing or the way I see them looking at their child. Asking questions that are open-ended. That's from Jen. Some staff on the CFC is when they're completing the routines-based intervention assessment tool. Open-ended questions. Lots of responses there.
Great, great, thanks. Yeah, so a lot is, really observing and understanding and looking through our professional eye, as well as discussing with the family and being able to identify through our questioning for it. So, so great. So we think about these strengths, and you've been able to identify a lot broadly. And really, why do we do strengths-based interventions, and what are they? And so, right from the beginning of families joining early intervention, it's recognizing that families don't come to early intervention as a blank slate. Regardless of the age of their child, they have been a part of a family with a vision and have been thinking about how their child learns, been thinking about their vision of parenting, thinking about how their family works, and actively working to make that happen. And so there's this whole history about thinking about, seeking to understand, and working to meet their outcomes as their family in a way that fits their cultural values and how that family works. And so before we can build upon those strengths, it's really taking that opportunity to understand what those strengths are and how families think about those strengths. And some of you might be familiar with this term of funds of knowledge. And so a family's funds of knowledge is all those components. It is about that history of what families bring to early intervention. And so funds of knowledge recognizes that people are competent, they have knowledge, and their life experiences have given them that knowledge. And so to understand these three different components of competence, knowledge, and life experiences, once we can access that, then again, we're really going to be able to tailor our interventions to what families are looking for from early intervention, as well as providing it in ways that fit that family and that family's life. So when we think about the competence component of funds of knowledge, this is what the family does. And so specifically around child learning and development, it's what does the family already do to help their child learn and develop? And those become those specific strengths from which we can then add different strategies and ways, as well as support those that the family is already using. The next component of the funds of knowledge is the family's knowledge. So they come with knowledge, and this knowledge is really the family's conceptualization of child development. So how does this particular family think about child development? How do they think specifically about their child? How do they think about how they want to parent? So really understanding not only what they do, but why they do it based on their understanding of the world, of their family, and their child. And this competence and knowledge really comes from their life experiences. And so depending on families' lives, they might have different thought processes and problem-solving approaches and outside resources that help them use their competencies and build new competencies, as well as how they learn new knowledge and utilize that knowledge. So again, this piece really recognizes that history that families bring to early intervention for it. And so really uncovering the family's funds of knowledge is what we're going to be talking about today. So one of the things that you illustrated in your chat box of what family strengths are is that there can be strengths that are internal to individual family members, which is what they know, what they already do, and what they can do. And then those external to individual family members. So who and what is already available to the family. So again, when we think about family strengths from the beginning of early intervention, we first need to understand what's already there, what's already happening, and so then we can build on it and avoid replacing what families are already doing great, and then support families in identifying new areas of need. So when we think about outcomes, again, we're going to focus primarily on how families support their child's learning and child outcomes, but I wanted to start by recognizing that the family strengths really come from meeting family outcomes, parenting outcomes, and child outcomes. And any of these outcomes can be a part of early intervention as we think about family-centered support. So when we think about family outcomes, and I do differentiate family and parenting, because there's family outcomes which are, what does the family want for their whole family or individual family members other than the child to be able to achieve to better their family as a whole. And this is really important, and when we think about creating family-centered IFSPs and providing family-centered supports and family strengths-based supports, because the child doesn't sit separate from their family, and we all know this and think about this all the time. Sometimes, though, we do think so much about the child that we kind of miss the bigger picture. And we really know this from research. We know that families need to feel good about themselves and need to have their family-level outcomes met in order to have the time and energy to really focus on child learning and development. And we have research that shows that family outcomes actually relate to positive child outcomes and parent-child interaction outcomes. The second type of outcome is parenting outcomes. And so these are what the family wants adults to achieve that are related to their child's learning, development, and or participation in everyday life. So these are things that families want to achieve as parents. This still isn't about teaching their child or helping their child learn, but sort of that bigger picture around parenting that's related to child learning. So when we think about these, this table sort of identifies and breaks out these different types of parenting and family outcomes in different areas that might be either early intervention resources that are provided, but they can also be supports that families bring to early intervention. So just looking at these as a little bit bigger here. So thinking about knowledge and skills, so a parenting outcome for one family might be that they need to get better ways to get both boys out of the house in the morning. This family has twins, and one of the things that they're looking for is knowledge and skills. How can we better get these two kiddos out the door in the morning in our morning routine? While a family outcome is that they want to be able to talk about their child's development to others so that their child is an accepted member of the community. And so this family outcome is more about their entire family in that they want to be able to, as a family, be a part of the community. You can see that it's still related to the child, but it's looking at the larger family and the impact that meeting this outcome would have on the family being able to participate in the community. Another area is having information, and so a potential parenting outcome for one family might be to understand more about the long-term implications of one of their child's seizures on his learning and development. So being able to provide information, and again, so you can see that this is not specifically about promoting their child's learning and development, but certainly very much related to parenting this child. And an example of a family outcome is thinking about insurance options. And so this is a bigger outcome for the entire family that's separate from, but certainly can impact their child. And then another area is community supports and connections. So a potential parenting outcome would be to be able to find childcare and for their child as a parenting outcome. And for this particular family, because they are more interested in more informal sources of of providing childcare, that they were interested in contacting a local college to see if a student from a child development program might want to provide some childcare for their family. Where a family outcome here about community supports and connections is that they're actually looking for a cycling group. This family enjoys cycling and was moved to a new area and was looking for a cycling group that they could join. And again, how is this related to child learning and development? When family members feel satisfied with their life, that then they are more ready to support their child's learning and development. So another area is maternal and financial resources, material and financial resources. And so a parenting outcome, again, related to their child, was having the physical therapist help them in finding the best bath chair for their child. And then for a family outcome is looking into scholarships for summer camp so that their children could go to summer camp. And again, you know, summer camp, even though it's related to one of their children, it's also related to their other children who would also be going away to summer camp. And emotional supports is another area where there could be parenting and family outcomes supported through early intervention. And so a parenting outcome would be around, and providing emotional supports can be around an early intervention professional coming with them as they think about preschool options, so that the actual early intervention professional is providing that emotional support. While a larger family outcome for this other family around emotional supports is connecting with a group of parents of multiples who would then be providing that emotional support. So interestingly, as you look at these two different families, one of the things that you see is that in two of these areas, Gary and Kenisha's family connects a lot with groups. They're looking for different groups for different opportunities to get their outcomes met, while Roberto and Cap are looking for individuals to do that for it. So I'm just going to break for a minute and see if there are any questions or comments thinking about parenting and family outcomes. I know sometimes that can be a little hard to differentiate, and it's less important to worry about whether or not something is a family or parent outcome, but more about thinking about, is this related, are we addressing all the outcomes that this potential family could have?
At the moment, I'm looking through the chat log. We actually have a very specific question that we're dealing with directly that doesn't really pertain to the topic at hand today. So far, Bonnie, I don't see any other questions. Unless you want to deal with speech services, we'll move on. Okay. I will let you handle that one at this point. Great. Okay, so then the other, so part of the strength is what is those already existing resources that families have. So these are the things that are external to individual family members, and who is what and what is already available to that family. And this is important to access because just like when we think about family strengths, when we identify them and use them and build upon them and spend time talking about them, we really can support families' confidence and competence. And the same happens when we identify those resources that families already have available to them. Because again, it's allowing families to see that you're already doing all this great stuff. You already have all these great resources. Us in early intervention is just one more resource, but we're not here to replace what you already have. So having that opportunity to understand what's already available is important for it. So these are different priorities,
that what you'll see is that some of these are resources that the family already has, and then the asterisk ones are the ones that the family's already working on. But the important piece of it in terms of the strengths is that the family's already working on it. So we don't want to think that we're starting from scratch. We want to understand where the families already are on them. So one here is a priority around feeling good about oneself. So what are the resources that the family has available to them for them to be able to meet this priority of feeling good about themselves? And so in the Coles-Williams family, Kenesha's new position that prompted their move to this new area was an important piece for them to be feeling good about themselves. Now, what's important to understand here is that, so this family had, this is a two-income family, a two-career family, where the family moved because Kenesha got this new position that was really important to her. And very soon after they moved, they had their twins, one of them with a complex medical need. Now, and then this family might say at some point that, well, while we were both planning on working, one of us should probably stay home because of our child's needs. Now, that could be fine if that's their decision and they feel good about that decision. But also having an opportunity to talk with them and not to make an assumption from our perspective that that is a good decision, because it might be that that actually makes one of them not feel so good about themselves. Their careers might be really important to them, and they want to be able to continue working while also making sure that their children's needs are met as well. So having a conversation, as you identified, talking to families and learning more from families, what are they really looking for, and how can we best support them in meeting what they really want? Because again, these areas of priorities, these are the things that are going to get families ready to support their child's learning and development. Alternatively, in the Cabrera family, feeling good about oneself is that the mother in this family, Kat, actually wants to stay home as she always expected to. So being able to identify what they have available to them to meet those priorities. So some of the supports that are already available around emotional and social supports is long-distance friends and family for the Coles-Williams family. So they're far away, so one of the things that they're looking for is making friends in a new city. So their strengths are their long-distance friends and family, while their needs are making friends in a new city. And for the Cabrera family, friends and family are nearby. So those are a strength that could be used as we understand to meet their parenting, family, and child outcomes. And so you can see here, too, that we can look across financial resources, child care, and time as a family as all different types of family strengths. And even if, as you can see in the right-hand column in this page, that there are certain things that families are still working on, when we identify what those strengths are that are already available, we can build upon them and utilize them to decide what we're going to do next. So if we went back to child care here, we know that for the Coles-Williams family, that they do have center-based child care, and they had center-based child care set up before their kiddos were born. So that's a strength that they have available. So if the family still wanted to both work, we can utilize that strength of having the child care already available and then working with that child care center to make sure that they could indeed meet their children's needs for it. Where for the Cabrera family, as I mentioned before, they're looking for more informal sources of child care. They do have family and friends available, but don't want to always rely on family and friends. So when they need additional child care, around when they can't rely on family and friends at that moment, or they feel like they're asking too much of them, we can think about how are we going to help them brainstorm what kinds of child care options there are. And earlier in the slides, you saw that together the EI professional and the family identified that going to the local college to see if there is a student who might be available was a way that fit how this family envisioned using child care, while also meeting their need for child care. And then you can see, so there's all these different areas of looking at the family. So then also how do they spend time as a family? What are their strengths around that? Having free time and having health care. So all these different areas are areas to talk about and to think about in order to access not only potential outcomes, which we can think about as their needs, but also family strengths. What do they already have available for them within those areas?
Well, Amy, before you move on, we did have a couple of questions that came in, and I thought that it might be better to address right now. So, PFC15 wants to know, is there a specific purpose for distinguishing between parent outcomes and family outcomes?
Yeah, less about worrying to differentiate them, as you're thinking about a particular outcome and worrying about, is it a parent outcome, is it a family outcome, and more about thinking about their definition. So when you're creating an IFSP or thinking about what else a family might want to work on, it's not only thinking about things that might feel very child-related, but also thinking about supporting that family as a whole. So that's more of the reason, is that sometimes we end up focusing very much on parenting outcomes. So they are outcomes for the family, but they're directly related to parenting the child. When we want to make sure that sometimes we broaden out of there as well and be able to say, well, what about the entire family? How do we make sure we're also both identifying those strengths, but then also what are they working on for their entire family as a whole?
All right, thank you. Yeah, and then Randy is curious about how these will be used in the development of IFSP or in the context of ongoing therapy. And I think that's really a question about how our strategy is being identified. And so I don't know, you might be I think you're going to be addressing that a little bit later.
I'm going to be addressing it more from a child perspective, so I'd be happy to share a little bit. And then we can also talk about it at the end of using sort of the same process to uncover it. When you're thinking about, and so IFSP outcomes, can have both child and family outcomes. That's where the family concerns, priorities, and resources piece comes in to the IFSP. So thinking, and it's difficult to do in the first one. Families are not coming to early intervention because they're worried about these bigger outcomes, but very specific to their child. So they might not be thinking about it yet, or might not be comfortable sharing them with us yet. But they certainly can be documented on the IFSP. So when you think about even doing the RBI, or if you use the, if you create an ecological map, those are opportunities to talk about that larger system and to talk about what's going on within that family that then can turn into those subsequent outcomes. And I think what's important about it is that it doesn't have to be a deficit to want to work on strengths. And so that becomes really important. And so the idea of, when we think about the Coles-Williams family, again, this is a family that has a lot of resources available to them, but there's still things that they want to meet, and there's still goals that they have. So when we think about it from a strengths-based perspective, it's really, instead of thinking about them as concerns, we can think about them more as visions or goals. What do you hope to be happening for your family? What are you looking for your family? What's your next steps for your family? And again, this could be a hard one to do in that first IFSP because families will be wondering why we're talking about it. And it might come up a lot more naturally during our intervention visits. So early intervention professionals can really be documenting along the way when things come up to then be able to share them on the IFSP officially or just to learn about the family along the way. Did that seem to address that, Maria?
I think so. Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but it seemed like a really good place to ask that question before you moved on to the next slide.
Yeah, great, great. Yeah, and and we can certainly come back to this at the end to think about, okay, so now as we talk through this with child outcomes, how do we move it up to also parenting and family outcomes if they don't naturally occur. So now we're going to shift specifically to child outcomes and promoting child learning and development. And so we all know what's on this slide around assumptions that we make. We know that families are the primary developmental mediators. We know that families are the ones who actually provide the intensity and frequency of developmental strategies to promote their child's learning and development. So what we do then is we support them in this role, and that's where a lot of the coaching practices are situated. We know that family routines are where learning opportunities sit. We know that there are lots and lots of opportunities for children to learn within their family's everyday routines. And so what our job is as early intervention professionals is to identify how those learning opportunities, which means that the opportunity is there. We can talk about whether or not it actually is a learning experience, which means it's not just an opportunity, but it's actually happening. They're making that opportunity happen. So one is we can identify how families are already using their routines to support their child's learning and development, as well as helping families turn those routines into even more learning experiences by providing different ideas around promoting the child's learning and development. And then the final piece is the strengths-based interventions, right? And we're talking about child strengths, family strengths, and professional strengths. So it's the triad of the strengths of those three individuals involved in the home visit, lumping all family individuals together, that really can maximize learning and development. So pulling from the family strengths of what they're already doing to help their child learn, pulling from our strengths of what we understand about child development, child learning, the strategies that we have that we know can support that learning and development for it, and then building on child strengths, what the child already has, so we can utilize those to identify and support next steps for them. So thinking about the family as the developmental mediator. So when we think about this, sometimes we use the term, that the family is the child's first teacher. I actually choose not to use that term because I think of a teacher as very different from what families do. I think of teachers as what we do, how we think. And families aren't necessarily thinking that way. Families are helping their child learn because that's a part of parenting. That's one of the roles that parents take on, is helping their child learn. And I've done some research where, and I'm going to share kind of some of the approaches a little later on, but I've done some research where we've just watched families and identified all the things that they were doing. Maria, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I got something popping up on my screen. That's something, there was an error, but maybe it just wasn't, sorry. Okay. So we just watched families to see what they're already doing to help their child learn, and then we talked to them about it later. And one of the things that was very consistent across families was that they didn't know they were doing all these things. They did not know that it was really helping their child learn. They were just being parents. And so it doesn't feel like a teacher because it's not as intentional. Sometimes it's intentional, but many times it's not intentional, it's not purposeful, nor do they recognize how important all those great interaction things that they're doing really matters for helping their child learn. So it's a much more natural process than we as professionals take on for it. Recognizing families as developmental mediators then means that our job is to promote family confidence and competence. Because the more families feel confident and competent in helping their child learn, the more they're going to do it. And what becomes important too is that what families help their child learn is very value and culturally based. What families do represents what they hold dear, what they find to be important, and what reflects their culture and their values as parents. So really in this role is very situated in not only what families do, but how can we help them feel good about what they do, their strengths, and then also recognizing and trying to understand how what they do reflects a larger family culture and values. So what do we do? And everybody in the chat box talked about these different areas of what we do to understand family strengths and understanding their funds of knowledge. How do we understand families' competency strengths, what they're already doing to help their child learn? Well, we observe. How do we know what families know about their child's development and how they think about child learning and how they think about what they do is actually helping their child learn? We discuss it with them. And how do we come to understand and appreciate how what they do and what they know actually reflects the family's thought processes and problem-solving approaches and how they want to utilize outside resources? We examine. And so using different questions with families, observing are both really important tools, as you've identified, to really be able to understand and appreciate how families' experiences and values guide those competencies and knowledge that they have. So when we think about family strengths in child learning, one thing that we sometimes spend a lot of time in is the center circle here. So when we think about helping their child learn, we know, as I mentioned just a minute ago, this is all situated in the family's individual culture, right? So it's reflecting how this family thinks. Then there's the routine activities that also reflects the individual culture. And then there's the need to dig even deeper, and that down to those specific learning strategies. So those strategies that the family uses, what families do, they might not think of them as strategies, but what families do to help their children learn. And it's digging deep into that area that then lets us really start understanding the family's thought processes. That we then do also uncover the routine activities, those routines that families think about, and then the individual culture. So for those of you who use the RBI, one thing that you can be thinking about is, okay, how do I use the RBI that sits at the routine activity level to then hone down on the learning strategies that the family uses? So what's the first thing that we can do? We can observe, and so observing at the learning strategy level. So what learning strategies does the family use and in which routines? So again, we really need to observe, because if we ask families what they do to help their child learn, it's really hard for them to come up with them. Because again, they don't see what they're doing as things that are helping their child learn. But we know that families are doing it. So part of the process is, one, families are just helping their child learn, period. Those natural child development strategies that could be used with any kiddo. But then what we also know is that families will make adaptations. They'll make adaptations on the strategies that they use to support their child's learning. Part of that is aligned to their goals for their child. So they think about, okay, what are the goals that I'm trying to have my child meet? What do I need to change up? Families are constantly evaluating and adjusting those strategies based on that. And just like thinking about it as a parenting role or a parenting occupation, that this is what families are doing. And so those adaptations and strengths really fall into three different areas. Two of them are environmental components, so the social environment that's made up of responsive interactions, and the physical environment made of physical adaptations, and then specific intentional teaching strengths that usually can also fit under responsive interactions, but we might pull them out as more particular teaching strategies for them. So starting with strengths and interactions, what might we be looking for as we observe strengths and interactions? And one tool that you can use, this is from the Piccolo, which is a parent-child interaction tool created by Lori Rogman and colleagues, that's used specifically for infants and toddlers. It's used a lot in early Head Start. That identifies the indicators of different interaction approaches that families take. And you can look and see, what are families doing to help their child learn by their positive parent-child interactions. And so the Piccolo is broken up into these four areas of affection. So these are things around sensitivity and warmth and positive expressions towards the child. Responsiveness, how does the family respond to the child's cues, their emotions, their words, their interests. Encouragement, so supporting their child in their efforts to learn and play and understand the world. And then more intentional teaching strategies that can include, shared conversations and shared play and ways of cognitive stimulation as well. And so what you might see as you think through this is we want to see strengths and we want to be able to identify strengths across these four areas, but depending on the family, we might see more strengths in one area than another, which then could tell us that those are the strengths we can highlight for families, as well as then identify for families different strategies or ways they can support the other domains that they might not be reflecting. So these are just a variety of interactional strengths that we might see in families. So starting in the left-hand side, soothing when fussy. Now that might seem like a very natural response that a parent would have, and it absolutely is, but one, we can recognize that this is important to child learning and development, and for some families, it might be that this is a strength you want to highlight. You might feel like you have less strengths in other domains, so thinking about that affection and responsiveness component becomes really important to be able to highlight. And then you might have other ones that feel a little bit more specific to the particular child. So putting a spoon to the lip and waiting for the child to initiate. Again, that might be for any kiddo, we might do that, or it might be very purposeful for an individual child specifically. But you can see sort of across them all, I'm not going to read them all, but all the different ways that interactions promote child development, so identifying those as strengths for it. So let's take a moment in thinking about those interactional strengths. Can you share an example in the chat box of how the family used a responsive interaction strategy that wasn't recommended or a part of EI, and how you use that strategy within your EI visit? So this is not something that you and the family talked about using and was a recommendation for the family to use, but was a natural strength that the family already brought that you could identify and use in your intervention.
I see several people typing, and it'll take a moment or two for the responses to start showing up.
Yeah, this is a little bit longer of one, so yeah, we'll just keep talking through it. And I think what's important here is that, you know, families could have a lot of strength in utilizing the strategies that we've come up with together. And those are important strengths too, but also first and foremost, just starting with what are those strengths that didn't need our support.
Okay, so our first response is from Maurice. It says, using YouTube to determine what to feed the child.
Great. Great. And so being able to then, and you know, once that came up and the family was able to identify it, I assume that then that was able to be built upon within intervention.
Right. There are still several people typing. They just have, the responses haven't come up. While we're waiting on those responses, there was a question from Jesse wanting to know about what about too much of affection, or where there's no discipline and attachment issues. I think that pertains to the slide previous, but so I don't know. I posted it in your chat box, so you can take a look at that. Chris is also responding that when the child became disengaged with physical therapy-related activity, his mom chose a ball-related game he really liked to get him re-engaged with the task. That's awesome. Bonnie, you're mute.
Sorry about that. Not sure how that happened. But that's great, because that's that's a great example of something that then you can continue to talk about, which we'll get to in a minute. That the talking about the strategy highlights it for the family to recognize too.
Oh, now we're starting to see some more responses coming through. So Sarah talks about the parent tied a toy to a high chair tray to keep the child busy, and then practiced with sounds and also prevented the throwing of toys.
Yes, these are exactly these are the strengths to identify.
Suzanne says her parent provided a choice response without being prompted, and she was able to praise and encourage the parent there.
Perfect.
Jennifer is talking about family taking the child horseback riding with adaptations, as this is a family group activity.
Great. That's a great example of moving from a child to a family outcome and how the family's already meeting it.
Right. And then let's see, we've got Valerie talking about swimming lessons for Tone.
Great.
And Selena, when the kiddo got overly frustrated or active, the mom would hug the child super tight and assure him he's okay. And then and they looked at adding some OT before they, so she's already kind of figured out that firm hug helped.
Yeah, and that's great. These are all great examples of how families are already thinking about this. Families have already come up with strategies and being able to identify those right from the beginning for it. Thank you so much for those who contributed. I did want to go back to the question about, what do you do if it feels like affection is not there? It's still starting with family strength, and we'll get to, okay, what do we do from there? But identifying anything that you see that the family is doing to help their child's learning and development. And for some families, maybe it's not in the affection and it is in the teaching area. Wherever you can see those strengths to highlight, then again allows the family to feel like I'm contributing something to my child's learning and development, and that's going to get more buy-in for your intervention. Every time we come in to share something, even with the best of intentions, if it doesn't start with where the family's already out at and identifying those strengths, families might feel less confident and competent. They might feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, that's why I need this professional here. So acknowledging and being able to identify, you know what you're doing, you've got this, here we are, with very specific ones, right? So families don't want cheerleading, they want to actually understand what they're doing. And those strengths can then happen more often. If you bring attention to it, the families will use them more often, and then from there we can move into the next, other interventions that happen from it. So these are the different strengths within interactions, and then thinking about physical adaptations. And when I use the word adaptations, I think about it as, certainly there are adaptations that we make because of a child's disability, but adaptations naturally occur for individual kiddos at individual times because of where they are developmentally. So, and I think about this this ride-on toy here in the yellow circle, because I think it's a great example of, depending on the child's age, we are going to see things. We're going to provide materials and environmental adaptations that fit where that child is. So the one with the really big handle, that kiddo is sitting on the toy with their feet on the I don't know what those things are called, where their feet sit, and the parent is pushing them. That's where they are. As they develop different competencies, they might be in the top, they might be using the toy as the top of the yellow circle shows, which is they're pushing it from behind. They're walking behind it and pushing it. And then as they get develop even more competencies, then they're going to propel themselves by sitting on it and pushing the toy. So we make adaptations all the time, and parents do this all the time, by just looking at what can their child do, and what do we want them to do, and what are we going to do next. So choices of sippy cups. Parents might try a variety of sippy cups. No, the sippy cup without handles doesn't work so well for my kiddo, but when I got the one with the handles, then he was able to use them. You know, outlets, sometimes it's for safety. We're just going to plug those electrical outlets up and not worry about it. And then how do we choose puzzles? We might choose a puzzle that's got a little bit more complexity to it, or we might have a puzzle that all has circles that are exactly the same size and it's just about putting in. So again, this can be a very natural process for families and is a very natural process. We might have other adaptations that families don't think about, but it's first identifying what are those strengths that families bring. So Pip Campbell, a while ago now, created a hierarchy of physical adaptations. This is actually used, if you're familiar with Kara's kit for either preschoolers or toddlers that they have as well. They use this hierarchy of physical adaptations of different ways you could adapt the physical environment. That could be looking at the environmental arrangement or the environment overall, the schedule, the activities that are happening in the activity that's occurring, materials the child is using, and the requirements, or having the child receive help. So, for example, hand-over-hand help of some sort for it. And what I like about this is it provides an opportunity for us to look at the strengths that the family brings, the physical adaptations, and look at it from a hierarchy of what's least intrusive to the child and the environment to what's more intrusive to the child and the environment. And so some things that families may bring that are strengths could be more intrusive, and so our role in intervention might be we can make them less intrusive, but from perhaps modifying, instead of doing hand-over-hand assistance, that is a strategy. It does help children learn. Maybe we can modify the environment a little bit. Or instead of modifying the materials, modifying a schedule. So it provides different ways to think about the different adaptations and strategies that are used. So as I kind of walk through these examples, please think about think about if you have any examples of what you've identified in your intervention visits of ways families have made different adaptations already without intervention support, and so therefore they're the strengths families bring to EI. So one way when we think about adapting the environment, and again, the word adaptation suggests change. It may or may not actually be a change, but it's just about the physical environment that the child is in. So environmental arrangement, it might be something that's very incidental that happens. So, you know, if a family has a very small living room, all the furniture in the living room might be very close together. That might not have anything to do with the child, but it's a great opportunity for the child to cruise. It makes it very easy for the child to go from one place to another. That can be a strength. Again, even if it's incidental, even if the family didn't do it on purpose, we can identify it, but it's actually a good thing. But an intentional environmental arrangement might be that we don't change things. So when we were looking at family strengths, a family whose child had a very significant vision impairment, they were told they learned themselves, it wasn't through early intervention, but they learned from one of their outside resources that keeping things in the same place was really important. And they took that knowledge, their funds of knowledge from an external resource, and they utilized it within their environment and intentionally kept their environment the same for it. Materials, the choice of materials might be to meet a goal. So we're going to learn more about this one in a second, but like a play mat that you fill up with water and that has toys floating inside. The materials might be because of a learning need. So, you know, velcroing a toy to a stool so it doesn't fall off, or that other great adaptation, or that other great strategy that was identified where the parent tied the toy to the high chair so it wouldn't fall off, is great ways, great strategies that the family might bring. They might change the requirements of an activity. So a parent giving very small amounts of liquid in a cup so that the child needs to keep asking for more. We identified that for one family as a strength that they brought with it. And then another one might be that they actually ask the child to use a spoon instead of fingers when feeding, even if it is a finger food. They usually use fingers with, but they were actually asking the child to use a spoon. So they were adapting the requirements so that the child would have more of an opportunity with the spoon. So, and the important part of this is that there might be places where you might see tweaks. You might see things that you want to change along the way, but still allowing it to happen. So any examples of how a family might have used an adaptation from your EI that you saw?
We've got a few people chatting, so hopefully we'll see some responses coming through.
Great.
And the picture, even just the picture behind your slide there with the book and the popsicle sticks.
Perfect. Yeah. Being able to make it easier to be able to turn pages. So a family might just decide to do that without thinking about it.
Penny's got a statement here that she has that the family has a higher table for the child to work out so that his 1-year-old twin couldn't get to it. Jen has a parent who uses a hair tie to keep a child away from unbuckling his seat while on the road.
Right.
Got one where just the same example, poured a small amount of juice in a cup.
There you go.
Yep. Lynn has a towel behind a child on the swing at the neighborhood park. Let's see. Jessie is working with a dad who gave lots of candy and suggested a few pieces incorporated into a healthier meal.
Okay, great. So you can see all these different ways. So families are actively doing this for it. So once we know all these different strengths, this then gives us a jumping off point for what we might do. I'm going to skip this questions one unless something has come in already. Maria, is there anything we should?
No questions. A couple of other comments from your previous slide. So a lot of good strategies being shared, but no questions. So
okay, great, thanks. So, identifying these strengths is really important, and again, us using our developmental eye to be able to identify them, because families are not necessarily doing that. But we don't stop there. Then it's having an opportunity to talk to the family to understand why the family is using the strategies and how they figured them out. So having an opportunity to have a discussion. And this allows us to get to the family's thinking. And what are they really trying to achieve, and what do they want? And that brings the strengths to another level. And I find that this step of discussing it is intervention itself. It provides an affirmation for us to be able to say to the family, you're doing these great things. But then it also provides an opportunity for us to understand from the family perspective, so then we can decide where to go next. So when we think about understanding the family's intentions, we might think in our head one reason why they might be doing it, but we could be wrong. And I'm going to share with you a couple of ones where I was actually wrong when I was observing, only to find out later why. So one family who had a child with cochlear implants, every time there was a sound as they were playing outside, the parent would identify those sounds that are heard. And in my special education brain, I was thinking, oh, she's doing this so that he can label the sounds that he's hearing out in the environment. But she was actually doing it so that the child could filter out those sounds, so the child could acknowledge them and then filter them. And what actually happened was this was a strategy that came from very early in her intervention. Supports, that this was recommended, and she just kept doing it. And so this gave us a jumping off point to make a decision of whether or not we should continue with this strategy, because it actually looked like the child was filtering pretty well. But we had to understand why this parent was specifically doing it. Here's another one of a parent running their child's fingers over Braille when reading a book. Again, in my brain, I was thinking, oh, they're probably doing this to get them ready to be a Braille reader. But when talking to the family, they were doing it so that he could experience touching books and touchy-feely books just like other children. So it gives us more information about what they are, how the family is thinking about it. Or for another family that was asking a lot of questions to the child about what the child is doing. So, what are you drawing? What do you see? Do you like it? What's that? And I was thinking from an effectiveness standpoint, I was like, boy, they're asking all these questions, but the child's not answering them. I'm wondering if this is really working for them. But the family knew that the child wasn't going to be answering the questions, but what they were trying to do was stir some interaction. So this becomes a really important place where, again, we might identify strategies. We might identify strategies that look great, but until we understand why the family is using those strategies, it's hard to evaluate whether or not they really are achieving that goal that the family is hoping to achieve. So this one was the example earlier. So these are the parents' own words around why they use this plastic mat with objects floating in it, and it really was around thinking about how to get him interested. So she thought it might interest him. He might look at the colors and maybe he'd like it and stay on his stomach longer, which was his goal. So the whole idea behind it, I just saw it in the store and I thought, that's something different. It's on the floor. He's supposed to be on the floor. So I thought I would just try it. So you could see the family very clearly connecting and thinking about the goal of him having tummy time with identifying a material that he might use. And sometimes the strength might come from somewhere that you least expect it. So it's great to ask about strengths that you might not even think of as a strategy or a strength. So this particular parent had a very new age music that they put on during bedtime. And as we talked about the CD at bedtime, not only did we learn that the music itself was very intentional, but the CD player was very intentional. So the mom said, I picked the CD because he's very good with music. So if I put anything that's a song, he'll hum it, he'll memorize it. So the CD's on purpose where it's not concrete, he really can't imitate it all that well. So she had to make some adaptations here. So it works, and yet it doesn't contribute to the whole unproductive piece. Then she talked about more adaptations that she made. I had to buy a new CD player because the other one, you could see the CD rolling and he would watch it. So there was lots of different ways this parent was thinking about it. And this was a parent who was evaluating a strategy that was recommended and making a decision of whether or not to actually use the strategy. So parents say you should never approach a blind person or a blind child from behind. But we do it. It doesn't bother him. We don't see any difference if we're telling him we're picking him up, whether we're picking him up from the behind or if we're picking him up from the front. So a lot of it, I think, like any child, is part of their personality. So now we're starting to understand not only the strategies, but the family's rationale behind the strategies. Now we can have deeper, richer conversations with the family about their thinking and thinking about how what we might contribute actually fits within how they're thinking. And here's another one about how a mom came up with a strategy about pointing things out to her in books. She does it more now because now I see she can retain more of her attention. To be honest with you, sitting and reading is something that she came up with. It's something that she evolved on her own. So we're starting to see that this family really understands and thinks about that she wants to see a child's quote-unquote readiness, that we're starting to see a little bit of now it's time for me to learn this, and that's how we can position potential strategies that we might come up with. And then thinking about how strategies might actually fit within the family's style. So this was a family who was talking about, who actually received a recommendation of talk to your child all the time, and the family was doing it. But as we were talking to her about it, we found how difficult that was because she took it as all the time. So she said, I just want to listen to music sometimes, and we'll go to the next town over and see the speech therapist, and I'll just listen to music, and then on my way back I'll feel guilty and say, okay, let's talk about the car in front. What is the color of the car in front of Mommy's car and next to Mommy's car? So thinking about how the family thinks about strategies allows us to continue to build from what those strengths are and be careful not to create strategies or identify strategies that might not fit this family. So I'm going to encourage you to think about these quotes just for time. We're going to continue to move forward with it. But think about how you might use what those families said in your EI work. How would you take it and utilize it in your interventions for it? I'm going to skip those questions too. And then once we have this information, what do we do with it? Well, we have to examine it to really think about how can we promote family confidence and competence, which is, again, our role in intervention once we know these strengths and how they think about it. So let's do a really, really quick poll of thinking about, have you ever recommended a strategy that the family was already using or already tried and abandoned before you recommended it?
So again, find the fourth box under your name, the polling function, and click on the response that fits. Give folks a few minutes to find that and respond. We ask everyone to respond if possible. Responses are coming in, so give folks a few more seconds to find it. Okay, let's go ahead and post those results. So the majority of folks have said yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's something that we always end up doing, and even if we have these conversations, we're going to end up doing it as well. And then, for those who identified as, I don't know, that's another piece where, families might not tell you that they were already using it, or they might not tell you that they tried something already and decided it didn't work. We have to think about our role as a professional and how that plays with how the family is feeling. And so, we come up with idea and they might not want to share with us that. And so, it's thinking about how do we come to understand as much as possible about it. We're not going to do the poll again for the sake of time, but it can also happen where, we recommend a strategy that conflicts with a strategy the family is using. And it's the same thing that, if we miss the opportunity to understand what the family's already doing, we might not have that opportunity to know that the strategy that we suggested actually conflicts or supplants something that the family is already doing.
There's a couple of comments here. Elizabeth talking about, Elizabeth was talking about how sometimes parents can get discouraged if they don't see an immediate effect. But Jennifer looks at it from a different perspective too, in that it gives an opportunity to explore why something didn't work. Right. And so really uncovering that becomes so important so that you can have that conversation of why it didn't work or why it didn't fit the family's values and way of life. We don't have to necessarily throw away a strategy right away, but we first have to understand that strategy from the family's perspective to decide. I tell a story frequently where I was watching this great coaching session between a parent and a physical therapist, and one of the things, and we've all recommended this, where you stick your leg out as the child's crawling, so the child has to crawl up and over for it as they're developing their crawling skills. And when I spoke to the parent, we were part of a research project, and so I was calling the family later about recommendations. And I asked the family if she used the strategies afterwards, and in the moment, she was completely seemingly into the strategy, and then she actually said that she wasn't using it because she felt like she was sabotaging her child's movements. And so for this family, that did not feel comfortable to her as a parent. Her job is to support her child, not getting in the way of her child. But that doesn't mean that we need to throw away that strategy. Having that conversation allows us to then be able to say that it gives us that opportunity to say, oh, well, maybe instead of you, we can use pillows. Does that feel more comfortable to you because it's not your body getting in the way with it? And so we want to be careful that we're providing these opportunities to promote family confidence and competence by having this conversation and understanding it. And so once we have all this information, it's really about seeing through the family's eyes. So we see through the family's eyes to affirm the family's strengths and strategies. So what is the family already doing? And so what's the difference between affirming and praising? In affirming, we take that strength and we link it to why it is a strength. We can provide a rationale, once we understand the family's rationale, why it actually is a strength. What is the family wanting the child to learn, and pointing out how we know that that strategy is working because of the child's response to it. In praise, we identify the strengths but perhaps without any context to it, or we think about it from an external reinforcement standpoint. So if we use phrases like, I like the way you did this, it's sort of like the same thing when we think about extrinsic versus intrinsic reinforcement for kiddos. If kids are already intrinsically reinforced, we don't want to provide external reinforcement. So thinking about how do we affirm in ways that allow families to feel good about themselves, that they're doing it. And that's intervention. Just pointing out those great things that families are doing is intervention. Then what we can do is also tweak. We can tweak already existing strategies to make them even more effective once we understand why the family is using it and how the family thinks about those strategies for it. And so how can we tweak? We could generalize it to more context or different contexts and use it in different places. We can tweak by using it more often within the same context or routine. We can explore when to use the strategy and when not. So for that filtering
example, we decided to keep that when if the family saw that the child was having trouble filtering, to continue to point out things in the environment, or if they wanted to talk about a sound, like a fire truck was exciting for the child, then let's point out those sounds. But if the child seems to have filtered it fine, then not use it then. And then also adjusting a specific strategy to be more effective from it. It allows us to avoid generic strategies, but really dig deep into particularly what the family is looking for and acknowledging what's already there and then adding some new ones. And that allows us to then provide the just right level of support that doesn't start from a place where the family doesn't need it to be started, and then it's very particular to that family's context. And then it also allows us, again, the number of new strategies, when we know it's already there and then tweak a lot of them, we don't have to add a lot of new strategies. And a family of mine actually used this comment. She said it avoids strategy bombardment, whereas a family you get so many strategies that then you don't know what to do with them. So I'm just going to go through this one really fast for it, but these are ways that you can actually utilize these strengths-based practices. So taking that time to understand, actually taking the time to observe in very natural context, discuss, and that is intervention, so we are doing. Document those strengths. Put them on the visit note. If there are things that are already happening, put them on. If your IFSP has spots for strategies, put them there, just like any strategies that are tweaked or added. Discuss family strengths at each visit. Affirmation is intervention. And then encouraging the family to problem solve with you without testing, and sharing back the family's words and thoughts. So it's not asking families questions that could be hard for them to answer, but really problem solving together, recognizing that they do come with knowledge to figure out for it. So we are going to skip about the beliefs piece. But it's sort of recognizing, too, if you have an opportunity, recognizing we're out of time, to think about how does our mindset influence how we utilize these practices. So what are those beliefs and values that are necessary to really work from this strengths-based perspective? And I just did want to acknowledge, we do come with strengths. This isn't about not using our strengths, but it's about starting with where the family is at and then utilizing our strengths in ways that build upon what the family is already doing. So again, just sort of taking that time to really understand that particular family, recognizing it is intervention, so we can feel okay doing it, and then be able to craft interventions from there while still building from them. So I know I sped up way much at the end, but I thank you for your time, and I appreciate your interest in this topic, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maria.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie. I know this topic we could go on and on about, I know. I want to thank Bonnie for being our great presenter today. Check out her books. She's got some wonderful books. Bonnie, you want to give us the title of the most recent? Push your talk button real quick.
Am I muted now?
Yeah, you can talk.
Okay. It's 7 Essentials for Family Professional Partnerships, and then the other one is the Early Intervention Guidebook that is in its 2nd edition as well.
Thank you. So, folks, just remember that you're going to get that email. Complete that survey. Your certificate of completion will be in your email box within 24 hours after you completed the survey. Be on the lookout for our next webinar, which is next Wednesday on the 13th, and we'll be focusing on promoting language and literacy development in at-risk children. And again, thank you so much for participating. See you all next week, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.